Donald Trump is doing a victory lap as the Biden White House snubs the January 6th committee. They wanted a bunch of records over from the executive branch. Of course, this is a congressional subcommittee, a select committee that is going to be investigating the January 6th incident. And they say we need to get our tentacles all over these documents that are at the National Archives. Biden White House came back and said, you can't have them. Here's what CNN is saying. They're calling this a stand down. They're saying the January 6th panel stands down on a request for some Trump documents. And so we're going to go through the actual letter that came out. But CNN tells us the House Select Committee that's investigating January 6th stood down on its request for some documents from the Trump White House after negotiations with the Biden administration. So Trump's not in office anymore. It's now the Biden White House and the January 6th Select Committee, which is mostly Democrats, having negotiations about resolving this, and it sounds like the White House is snubbing them. White House has said some records that the House asked for potentially could concern state secrets or executive privilege because they were part of high-level national security deliberations. This came from a letter from White House Counsel. This was released on Tuesday. White House said it would, quote, the House Select Committee said that they would defer its request for those records. So it's sort of like the Select Committee was saying, well, we wanted all of that stuff, but since you're not going to give it to us, well, we still want it. We're not going to want it now. We're just going to defer the request for those documents later down the road. So it's sort of like, well, we didn't really want it anyway, so I guess we'll just see if we can get it later. So the actual letter that came through is from this guy, Jonathan C. Sue, Deputy Counsel to the President. He is here, photographed here. The photograph is not part of the letter. The letter was actually drafted on December 16th, but it's now been made public. And so this was from the Deputy Counsel to the President. You can see the letterhead is from the White House over to the Deputy Staff Director and Chief Counsel, a woman named Kristen L. Ammerling. She's the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack over in Washington, D.C. And so the White House is sending a letter, the executive branch sending a letter over to Congress to address to this fake Select Committee. It says, Ms. Ammerling, I write to memorialize our discussions regarding 511 pages of presidential records from the files at the National Security Council. You wanted those records. You asked for them. As you're aware, the review period for these presidential records was extended for both the incumbent and former presidents in order to complete the review process. We've got some formalities we've got to adhere to. And he's writing because they've had a lot of conversations about this. They've already made decisions, and he's just memorializing this in writing. It says, as specified below, we've come to an agreement. The Select Committee has agreed to withdraw or defer its request for the documents that are listed in Exhibit A. This agreement follows the previous agreement to defer its request of 50 pages of presidential records related to other exclusive presidential authorities. Both agreements reflect the ongoing effort by the executive and the legislative branches to ensure the Select Committee's legitimate needs are accommodated while preserving important executive branch prerogatives, such as the need for confidentiality in presidential decision-making. Further, both agreements are without prejudice to Select Committee's ability to revisit these requests and respond appropriately if the circumstances arise. So they're doing a couple things here. One, you can see that they're not saying that this is an outright denial. So if there's a more urgent need down the line, they'll consider giving it back over to the Select Committee if such circumstances arise. But you can also notice that they are protecting the executive branch. This is one of the most beautiful things that our founding fathers crafted in our government, is that the different branches have strong interests to protect themselves, and it's the balance of power. They have to go and sort of claw for their power with the other agencies, with the other co-equal branches of government. Here, Congress is saying, we think that we're entitled to everything the executive branch has. And the executive branch is saying, no, not so fast. These are our records. We have our own things that we care about over here. We know you're an investigative body. We know that you're on the same team as we are, but we have to think about opening Pandora's box. If we just give you everything that you're asking for here, what happens when there's a Republican Select Committee that comes out here and starts asking for the Biden presidential records, or they want to go back to Obama or whomever the next presidential candidate happens to be? And so It is very, very much about protecting the executive branch. He goes on. Sue explains, first, the Select Committee has agreed to withdraw its request for certain presidential records. These are responsive. He says these records appear to have no content that might be material to their investigation. And we've gone through this before. We've taken a look at this request many times on this channel. Fishing Benny Thompson, we called him. They wanted everything. They wanted to know what people had for breakfast, essentially. What movie did you watch the night before the insurrection? And how did you have your eggs that morning? It's like, come on, guys. You don't need all of that stuff. It's a fishing expedition. And so the White House is not going to be complying with that because if they do, that sets bad precedent. He says, secondly, the second committee has agreed to defer its request for other presidential records within the 511 pages, a whole different category. He says these largely originated outside the White House from executive branch agencies with responsibility over law enforcement and intelligence gathering. These records reflect the NSC's role as the principal means for coordinating the executive departments and agencies in development of national security policy. So he says, in recognition of the fact that those agencies are better positioned to accommodate, why don't you ask them for it? Go ask them. Go to the relevant agencies and see if they're willing to give it to you. Also, he says, the Select Committee has agreed to defer its request for internal White House documents that collect and summarize those intelligence agency reports. So you're seeing a pattern here. The Select Committee has agreed to defer. Previous page, agreed to defer. We also hear, agree to withdraw. We have here another one. Select Committee has agreed to defer its request up for the documents bearing on the NSC's deliberative process, including documents that were prepared for the Principals Committee. This is where they consider very important national security policy issues. The executive branch has longstanding and important interest in maintaining the confidentiality of this decision-making process. Last page of Sue's letter says President Biden recognizes that Congress has a compelling need in its service of its legislative functions to understand the circumstances that led to the insurrection that took place. But the documents that they've agreed to withdraw do not appear to bear on the White House's preparations for or response to the events, or on efforts to overturn the election or obstruct a peaceful transfer of power. In other words, he's saying your document requests are not relevant anyways, so you didn't need them. You can do your job without them. Accordingly, the Select Committee's agreement to withdraw or defer these documents, as well as the documents subject to prior deferral, should not compromise its ability to complete its job. Signed off on here by Deputy Counsel to the President. Now, this has been a big battle for Donald Trump. He's filed a lawsuit that we're going to take a look at that is now on the docket at the Supreme Court. And so after this news broke and that letter came out saying that the White House, that's a Democratic White House, it's on the team of the Select Committee, which is by a large majority Democratic. And many people argue that Kinzinger and Liz Cheney are essentially Democrats, very unlikely to get reelected. And so Donald Trump gets this news and he sort of does a victory lap. He posts this December 29th, says, the unselect committee of radical left Democrats and two failed Republicans, referring to Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, has just dropped a large portion of their request for my records and the documents. A very big story, even though the New York Times refused to put it on the front page. The reason that they dropped the records request is that they don't want this horror show to happen to Biden and Hunter in 3 years. If they do it to him, well, the next Republican Select Committee of whatever, political waste of time, is going to do the same thing. This also changes the entire complexion of their request, he says. Not that there are any documents that would be incriminating or a problem for me, but the witch hunt continues. And so he's doing cartwheels over there, and Liz Cheney responds. She actually retweets this and says, hey, false. The January 6th Select Committee hasn't dropped requests for any necessary records. In fact, we're actively litigating to obtain the White House records that Trump is trying to conceal. We will not allow him to hide the truth about January 6th or his conduct from the American people. And so she posted that on Twitter, and you might be asking yourself, what are we talking about? What litigation is happening? What's going on? Well, this is now docketed at the United States Supreme Court. So remember that this was an incident where this was working its way up. Donald Trump and his team, they filed a lawsuit directly against Benny Thompson. You can see the two here. Trump on the left, we've got Benny Thompson on the right. And so Trump former president as the petitioner suing Benny Thompson in his official capacity as chairman for the Select Committee. This was actually docketed at the Supreme Court on December 23rd. The case history, more or less, is Trump filed the lawsuit, says I shouldn't be required to give him over. So he loses. The United States Court of Appeals confirms that. They say, nope, give the documents over. And so now he's appealing to the United States Supreme Court. So you can see several different documents were filed very recently. Right before Christmas, we had the actual petition for the writ of certiorari, and then we have the application to stay the pending disposition of the petition. Then we have the motion for expedited consideration, asking the Supreme Court, we need your ruling on this quickly. The Supreme Court is, moving. They got a lot of issues bubbling up, but we need a decision on this because the January 6th Select Committee is literally criminally prosecuting people or referring that over to the DOJ. We see that with Steve Bannon. He's got court trial scheduled for the middle of next year. And then we have on December 29th a supplemental brief of Donald Trump that was submitted. So we'll go through those documents, of course, in a separate video in a deeper dive. Be on the lookout for that. But we also have some response now. So we saw that Donald Trump, this lawsuit is going on at the Supreme Court. That's for Donald Trump's records. But he's going to be invoking things like executive privilege. Like he's the president, right? There's many other people who were allegedly involved in this case that were not the president. People like this guy. This is Jim Jordan, allegedly involved. This is somebody who is now in the crosshairs of the January 6th Select Committee, along with, 48% of, the rest of America. For some reason, their list was like 21 pages long. News of the deal reported earlier on Tuesday by the Associated Press. I'm talking about this deferral withdrawal agreement by the January 6th committee comes less than 2 weeks before the first anniversary of the almost end of America, at a moment when the committee is ramping up its pressure on recalcitrant Trump confidants, one-time administration officials, and other allies. Just before Christmas, they asked Jim Jordan, representative out of Ohio, Republican, to meet with investigators. Those exchanges included different text messages with Trump and his legal team, and we saw a lot of that I think that was the week before Christmas on the cable shows. Liz Cheney was out. Mr. Thomas was out. Benny Thompson said, "We understand that you had at least one and possibly multiple communications with President Trump on January 6th. He's writing this letter. This is Benny Thompson down here, writing the letter over to Jim Jordan. Liz Cheney, Republican of Wyoming and the vice chairwoman of the committee, also has endorsed the approach, calling Jim Jordan a material witness. So they're going after him now. He's saying, I'm going to consider cooperating with the request, even though this panel is a sham. We also have Representative Scott Perry also calling this illegitimate. And so you're sort of seeing the Congressional Select Committee going after their own congresspeople now. And that same pattern, that same precedent gets established. What happens when a Republican Select Committee comes in next time and they want to go investigate a bunch of Democrats? The committee has been reluctant to issue subpoenas for sitting members of Congress, preferring to gather evidence voluntarily. But Thompson has pledged to take that step as needed. If Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, if Jim Jordan from Ohio, if he finds that they are not cooperating, is he really going to issue subpoenas against them? Because that is sort of, once again, opening Pandora's box. The same reason that Joe Biden wouldn't want to allow the co-equal branch of government full unfettered access to the executive branch. You start to ask yourselves, do you want that? Do you want different Congress people and different select committees to be able to go into other Congress people and sort of issue subpoenas towards them, or yes or no, right? Because that can get very, very messy very quickly, and we'll see if they go down that road. So Donald Trump is very excited about this news. The January 6th Select Committee seems like it's undeterred. They're going to be moving forward. We already know that they've made criminal referrals for other people that were within the president's wing, but are no longer within the president's circle. People like Steve Bannon. He's got a criminal case scheduled for trial the middle of next year, which of course we are following along. And there's even hints that they're going to be trying to indict the former president. So we'll see how long this political spectacle continues to go on, probably at least until the next election or so. So we'll follow it along. Hope you join us on the ride, and I will see you on the next one.